Good evening, everyone. This is the time and place for a special city council meeting of March 10th, 2016. We'll start off with a roll call and determination of quorum.
Laurenti. Here. Wright. Here. Weifenbach. Here. Doyle. Estes. Here. Lewis. Drew. Here. Roberts. Here. Nordstrom. Here. Scott. Here. We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. And now if you'll join me with the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to summarize briefly what's going on here, and then we'll get into the item on the agenda. We are here due to an alleged violation of the Code of Conduct for Elected Officials, which is Resolution 2012-70, which became effective September 2012. A process is defined in the Code of Conduct resolution to allow the council to hear facts, debate, and render a decision in the issue at hand. That process allows the accused, in this case Jerry Wright, to choose the venue for the complaint process, either executive session or public meeting. It's my understanding Mr. Wright has chosen for this issue to be heard in the public meeting. The complaint centers on the appropriateness of a contact with Black Hills Works Management initiated by Councilman Jerry Wright on June 17, 2015. Complainant Ron Sasso filed a written report on December 22, 2015 and requested action in the matter. The complaint alleges Jerry Wright violated the Code of Conduct in a variety of ways, including testimony given in an unrelated lawsuit as well as initiated contact with Black Hills Works. The complainant believes or believed that his dismissal from Black Hills Works was related to Wright's contact with his employer. A private investigator, Mark Pecora, was hired to conduct fact-finding in this matter. Pecora's qualifications for this task include his training and experience as a career special agent with the FBI and as a current private investigation contractor. The investigation report has been made available to all City Council members, and it is presumed all members have read and understand the contents of the report. Mr. Wright has obtained private counsel who is accompanying him tonight. According to the resolution of the Code of Conduct, the council's duty tonight is to become fully informed, to discuss whether a violation of the code has occurred, to seek resolution without further action, or to seek resolution by applying any other sanction available to them under the law, which would include public reprimand, public censure, or dismissal. Official action by a concurrence of 2/3 of the elected aldermen, and this is according to the resolution. That requires 7 of the 10 members shall be required to impose a sanction. As you can see, we have 2 of our members missing tonight, and Mr. Wright has informed me that he's not voting in the matter, so that leaves 7 members up here on the dais. So we'll start the process with a couple opening statements, and then I will read in the agenda item and proceed from there. So starting out, we have a time for an opening statement by Ron Sasso.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to speak, so I'm glad that that opportunity is available. Probably one of the first and most important things that if I can impress on you, all of you, is I hope it's one thing to be familiar with the investigative report, which I believe you all should be, and also to be aware of what my initial complaint stated. Actually, Mark Pecora, when I first met with him, the first thing he said to me was, I'm not quite sure exactly why they hired me because I laid out so much information, and I tried to do that to make it more efficient. That said, I actually believe that it was very wise to hire Mr. Pecora. I believe he did an outstanding job. I've read the investigative report. There are some things that I personally would disagree with in there, or at least I would say, well, I would have worded this a little differently, but at the same time, what's in there is I believe it's a well-done report. First thing, because I know that it's difficult to, and I should ask whether or not I have a time frame on my, I was planning on being done by 8, so, only kidding, but.
You're the complainant. We're going to give a little latitude on the time, and we'll give the same to Mr. Wright if he needs it.
Okay. Thank you. That said, and one of the things that I also wanted to, I was involved with the Code of Conduct and revising that, and one of the things that I felt strongly, and I put that in my initial complaint, is that I believe for any complaint, it's important that the person who lodges that complaint and the accused to be able to address the person who lodged the complaint. So that's something that I'm glad that opportunity is there, and I will allow that. I think that's what our Constitution is founded upon. The issue of my complaint started, just as a summary, started with a column that I wrote, protected under the First Amendment. A column in which I even complimented Alderman Wright. And as a result, he took offense at that, approached my employer, and we can, the investigative report says one thing, Alderman Wright says something else, and you have that information. I'll leave it at that. But my First Amendment, the first thing when each and every one of you takes office, you take an oath of office. You swear to uphold and protect the Constitution of the United States, which includes that First Amendment. Now, you could end up getting bogged down on whether or not Alderman Wright led to my employment change, but in my initial complaint, because I thought that could be a possibility, it does not say that. One of the things, even though I would, that's fine to discuss, at the same time, my complaint indicates that he approached my employer and applied a level of pressure, and at that time was city council president. So that's probably one of the first and foremost. And that's based on my freedom of speech. All of you are familiar with the other parts of that code. There's the question of whether or not interference at an employer, whether or not the Code of Conduct indicates that it was only to be for the City of Rapid City employers, or if it should be all employers, that each and every person should be allowed to work free of any undue harassment. And I believe that it should apply, what's good for the city should apply to everyone within the city. I think the information regarding possible perjury and lying under oath, you have that in my complaint. I was not sure. I did not want to wager on the legality of perjury and whether or not it constituted perjury, and I think that information is covered within the investigation. I can tell you that my life is radically different than it was. Whether or not it was a cause and effect, one cause that I can say is that I don't know if you notice, I'm not writing columns for the Rapid City Journal, so it's with a little bit of irony that because I was in the news, that even my part-time employment was at least temporarily sidelined. So I will share that piece of information, and I agree with the Journal on that decision wholeheartedly. Aside from that, politically, I've been on the dais. I've worked with Jerry Wright. I think we got along okay. I think politically we disagreed on things, and I think this is one of those where I strongly feel overstepped the bounds and violated the code of conduct. And I think if you were in my shoes, each and every one of you, at an employer who had nothing to do with my part-time employment being approached, it's an odd thing. It's an odd thing, to say the least. So, and to me, that First Amendment, the Constitution, what we are here for, if we can't protect that, if we cannot allow people to speak freely, we have bigger issues. So anyway, thank you, and I will be here to answer any questions that you might have. So.
Okay, thank you. Alderman Wright?
Mayor, fellow council members, the complaint against me and the resulting investigation arise as a result of my visit to the Black Hills Works to discuss Ron Sesso's editorial during the last campaign accusing me of managing a corrupt landfill. While I deny those accusations, visiting the Black Hills Works was not the smartest thing I did or could have done, and upon reflection, could have handled it in a better manner. I apologize to my wife, family, Black Hills Works, constituents, friends, supporters, the Sasso family, and all of the people of Rapid City for making such a rash decision. My actions spawned a flurry of accusations, a threatened lawsuit against the city and myself, and its resulting investigation. I want to be clear that during my visit with Black Hills Works, I never asked for anyone to be punished or fired. I never took credit afterwards for anyone getting fired or terminated. Certainly, the letter by Attorney John Nooney presenting his interpretation of my discussion with him differs from my reflection and recollection of the spirit and content of our discussion. This conversation took place over a lunch at a crowded restaurant. I had recently learned that Ron Sesso had been fired. I did feel guilt that perhaps my visit to the Black Hills Works could have influenced that decision, and had sought to express my concern to Mr. Nooney. Contrary to Mr. Nooney's interpretation of my comments, I was not bragging. Instead, as I remember the discussion, I tried to convey a concern that somehow I had influenced the decision. I am thankful that time and facts have shown that my visit to Black Hills Works had nothing to do with the termination, and confirmed I did not seek the termination. The completed investigation has shown I did not seek the termination, and my visit to Black Hills Works did not bring about the termination. The investigation also shows that I did not commit perjury. With the investigation complete, it is time for us as a community, me included, to move on in a more constructive and a positive manner. And I look forward to serving and working with you, my constituents, and with the entire city and the mayor to better prepare the city for a bright future. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I will read in the item into the, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, sir.
I'm sorry, Mayor, just a couple of comments if would be allowed by the council and you. Talbot Wazorek, and I'm attorney working with Mr. Wright. He asked me to look at some of these materials. He asked me to read the report with him and convey a couple of comments because of some of the legal allegations that were contained in the complaint. It just strikes me that really we're here almost because of a coincidence, because Jerry happened to go in when it's clear by the record, it's clear by all the information, Black Hills Works had made a decision regarding Mr. Sasso and not quite followed through with it yet. And had that coincidence not, that timing coincidence not existed, I doubt we'd be here tonight. We have now a complaint that everybody's looking at here. I want to address a couple things. The council's looked at the complaint. I want the council to know that Jerry has told me as to the report that he is comfortable if the council chooses to release the investigation to the public, that it can be done. He has no objections to that. And I think that even comes into play as certainly Mr. Sasso has his interpretation of, and made some comments such as that there was applied a level of pressure, but the complaint and the investigation of the complaint does not bear that out. And so Mr. Wright is comfortable if the council should so choose that the investigation can be released to the general public. Now, there's been mention of the code of conduct, but the thing that one has to remember is the code of conduct specifically says it does not mean you have to sit quietly. As a lawyer, I hear the First Amendment talked about at times. The fact that somebody disagrees with your interpretation and takes you to task in that interpretation is not a violation of the First Amendment. Mr. Sasso accused Jerry of corruption. Corruption by definition means that he oversaw bribery. There's no showing of that. There's none of that in the record. And for a man who's served 2 decades in the armed forces, both active and reserved, and put as much time to serving this city, that can be taken very personally. As Jerry admits here, maybe he took it too personally, but the request here that this be considered a violation of the standards, I think, is a request too far. If you would do that, if in retrospect, looking back on what you said as an elected official, that you could have said it better is the standard that you got to live with, nobody can live with that standard. And in a town the size of Rapid City, where would you draw that line? Mr. Wright knew one of the people at Black Hills Works that he talked to. If he had run into that person at a chamber function and discussed it, is that inappropriate? If you start drawing that line that you cannot talk to people in this community because of how that could be interpreted, as a councilman, who can you talk to, who can you not? And I've went through the standards, and those standards do not apply in this situation. So what we're asking tonight is that you recognize the investigation. If you should so choose, you can release the investigation to the public over no objection of Jerry, and that this matter be closed, no action or reprimand be taken. Finally, on to regards to perjury, I just note that the report states that they don't see the perjury. Mr. Sasso makes a fairly straightforward, he doesn't know whether it constitutes perjury. I reviewed it. By definition, it doesn't constitute perjury, and regarding the statements made in that deposition is a several-hour deposition. You take one statement out of it. That statement is a statement of Jerry's opinion. It's the same statement he's given regarding that issue for 7 years. And I doubt anybody here who's talked to him about that issue believes that he believes anything different than what he said that day. And Mr. Mayor, Council, if there is question on the legal issues or anything else, I'd stand with Mr. Wright to answer those.
Thank you. So I'll read the item into the agenda now, and as the council knows, you're free to make a motion anytime you like after the item's been read in, or after this item's read in. We can take a moment because of the code of conduct issue. You can take some time and become more informed by asking questions. I'll leave that up to you. Item number 1, review investigative report on alleged violation of Rapid City Code of Conduct for elected officials. and I'll turn it over to the council. Go to Brad Estes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Oh, you did start my 5 minutes. Oh, all right. Well, I'm going to start it off with a motion. I'm going to make a motion that the council will be a four-part motion. Motion that by council vote, we recommend Alderman Jerry Wright for his actions as it relates to his communications with Black Hills Workshop relating to Ron Sasso. That's A. B, that we ask Mr. Wright, as he remains an elected official, not to do that again. C, that if this passes, no further action be taken. And D, that the report and the investigation be released to the public. And if I get a second, I guess I'd like to keep the floor.
Could you go over number one again, A?
Well, that just by public vote, no writing, just by public vote, we reprimand Alderman Wright for his actions as it relates to his communications with Black Hills Works regarding Ron Sasso.
Okay, and did we get a second or not? Okay, second by Darla Drew.
And I guess I do have, I'll keep the floor here, and when I was growing up, my dad had a guy that worked for him. He was a construction superintendent, and his name was Mo. And when we needed something done, Mo did it. If it took a 2-pound sledge and you needed to drive a square peg into a round hole and you needed something done, that was the guy you went to. Jerry Wright, I love serving with Jerry Wright. Jerry Wright's good for the city, and he's a lot like Mo. You want something done, Jerry can get it done. But when you're an elected official, you can't always take the 2-pound hammer and when you're mad, react the way Jerry reacted. I ran against Ron Sasso. He's a constituent of mine, and he deserves to be treated fairly, and all of our constituents in this city do. If Jerry Wright would have went to the Journal and had this conversation, we wouldn't be here. But he didn't. He went to an unrelated employer in the matter. And I guess, and Mr. Sasso stated, different facts and stuff. Because all we have to go off of is Mr. Pecora's report. And parts of the report were Dr. Usera talks about her conversation with Jerry Wright. He was very pleasant and professional, but he made his comment that he opened the conversation by stating that he's always supported Black Hills Works, which is fine if you're just a citizen. But if you're the president of the city council, you could be laying out that you're a person of influence. She also stated in there that Wright stated that someone needed to put him under control. I believe that's the exact words that it was. He also stated that the matter should be addressed with Ron. Now, this is an unrelated employer to the fact, and she states that as Jerry left, and he was very professional and very courteous, left her with the feeling that he wanted some type of recourse against Sasso. Now, those are notes that I took out of the report. So, I think it's unfortunate. Jerry's a take charge, get the job done kind of a guy. He stated that he regrets it, but I don't think we can just dismiss it. And at the end of the day, for me, he passed up a damn good opportunity just to bite his tongue and be quiet. And I'll just leave it at that and see where it goes. Thank you.
Go to Amanda Scott.
Thank you, Mayor. Alderman Estes has stated a lot of the same things that I pulled from the report as well. When I read the investigative report, what I was really looking for was if there was harm done, And as Mr. Sasso indicated, when he first filed the complaint, he truly believed there was direct harm done. As he stated today, it's come through the report and through other statements from Black Hills Works that the harm that Mr. Sasso perceived had been done directly to him by this visit did not occur. There was already actions in place, and it really truly, like Mr. Wright's attorney stated, it was a circumstance of timing. So one of the things I was looking for was harm. I was also looking for, was there direct threat? And based on the interview of the people at Black Hills Works, they all indicated that Alderman Wright was professional and was calm. Even if I find that a little hard to believe, because I know when Jerry gets his feathers ruffled, he can be quite animated. But all the indications in the report showed that he was very calm. He was just wanted to express his concern. With that said, Jerry's also admitted that he now views his actions as a mistake. I have to stand here and say publicly, I view it as a huge mistake. I'm saying that from my personal opinion because it's not something I would do. I would not go out and confront someone because of what they said. The Rapid City Journal has written articles about me or my opinions in the past as well, and I've always called the Journal to address any perceived errors that I had wanted addressed. So I didn't really look to see whoever wrote the column to approach their primary work, or if they had another job or a second or even a third job. I went directly to the Journal. And as Alderman Wright has indicated, he recognizes that probably should have been his first call because that's the media in which the column was written. So I was really prepared here to kind of shake my finger at Jerry and say, you know better. But I also know with the 3.5 years I've served with Jerry Wright, Jerry is one of those that when he thinks he can effect a change, he doesn't really wait for everybody else. He charges the hill. And he does go and try to effect the change, which is a positive thing in some of the things throughout our city. But as we all know, if we always charge the hill, sometimes it's going to bite us in the backside, and I think this time it did. And so I just want to conclude by saying I appreciate Alderman Wright offering apologies to Mr. Sasso and the community. I believe, if I heard correctly, he also offered apologies to the council, and I really appreciate that because any action that any of us take reflects on all of us, and the citizens deserve better. So I appreciate Alderman Wright hopefully using the 72-hour rule going forward, let things settle down a little bit, think it through before we go out and try to gather the facts of anything that is reported in any of the media. Thank you, Mayor. I'll yield the floor.
I will go to Ron Weifenbach.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I would like to thank our council president for eloquently putting and framing what has happened here. But I got to say that I'm very disappointed in what happened. We work hard. I know I do, and I know most of my colleagues work hard to gain the respect of our constituents in the community. It goes without showing. I remember Chief Jaggeris having this conversation with him when he took over the chief's position. I said, Chief, you know, when you walk in the door to your the other officers in there, they look at you as a different person today than you were yesterday. When I got elected as an official and I walk into a room that's full of constituents, they look at me in a different manner, even though I am the same person I was before I got elected. I'll be the same person after I'm gone. I put my pants on the same way. I do the same things. There's a level of respect that we as a council, and I've seen in the past and times that we have a tendency to forget. I'm not here to pile on to Mr. Wright. I disagree in the manners of what Mr. Nooney believes he said. I'm positive I was involved in some of the litigation that was happening with P6 at the time. I was told by the opposite side of Mr. Nooney the same facts that Mr. Nooney had presented. So, but I'm not here to argue that. I just want to get that out there on the table. I'm a little disappointed that we're arguing over something that's pretty well cut and dried. I just hope that, you know, this reprimand to Mr. Wright as it's laid out here tonight, that the council can take a hard, deep look in the mirror and go, you know what? When you walk into the room, or when a constituent's mad at you and you're positioning something, they state something to you, you're a public figure. You're the one that got elected. You don't have to come up here. You don't have to put yourself in the spot. You don't have to referee the ball game. You don't have to be the umpire. You don't have to do any of that stuff. But if you do step up to do it, you have a responsibility. You have a responsibility to your constituents, to the citizens of Rapid City, to do the best possibly you can. You make a mistake, you live up to it. You try to make it right. You move on. It was once said that if you want to judge a man's character, just put him in a position of power. You get a clear picture of how that person acts in that situation. I don't think this arises to the occasion of any removing Mr. Wright from his position. I believe that his constituents that voted him in, we're on 2-year terms right now. In 2 years or a year, when his term comes up, if they feel that it's necessary, they'll vote him out, or they'll vote him back in, one or the other. I believe that that's a good process that we have in place today. Sometimes I know it's not quick enough for some people for resolve or whatever their issues are, but I think that we as a council take this and learn something also from it, that the fact that when we walk into a room or we address our constituents when they're mad at us and they call us on the phone or they address us at the dais, that we have an understanding that they're looking at us from, as we do here. We sit up here and look down at you guys, and it's easy for us to do, and it's harder for you to come to the podium and speak. I've been on that side, but I know where it's at, and it takes a lot of gumption, a lot of courage for people to come up, and we don't need the opportunity to stymie that conversation. I want to reach out to the citizens in our community and say, we want you to talk to us. We don't want you to take this as an issue that this would happen to you. It won't. And if it does, we'll address it, and that's what we're doing tonight. We're addressing it. We're addressing the issue. We want our constituents and our citizens to tell us what they think, because we can't operate if we don't understand. We could try to operate within our sphere of influence, and that doesn't ever get us the right decisions. We need to have you all involved, the citizens involved. They need to feel comfortable coming to the dais, coming to the podium, and telling us how they feel. Tell us the facts of the situation, and not feel that they're going to be in a position that we're going to put them in any kind of a situation that makes them feel bad about themselves or what they said or anything like that. With that being said, again, I would like to thank our now president for eloquently framing the argument, laying it out there about as simple as it can be. The fact is, something happened that shouldn't have happened, and we're addressing it tonight. The council, we'll see. I don't think the majority of the council would agree with that type of situation. Thank you.
Now we'll go to Steve Larendi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to start just by saying that I'm a little disappointed that everybody on this council is not here tonight so that the public can hear every voice that's on the council. We've tried, I think, multiple times now trying to get everybody here, and yet we still have 2 people missing. I don't know if they were confirmed to be here tonight, but they should have been here tonight. It's that important that we have everybody on this council weighing in so that everybody in the public knows and sees that we're going to hold one of our own, one of the elected officials, accountable for their actions. And so I'm very disappointed in that alone. I'm a little disappointed as well that the president of the council has decided to pursue just a reprimand. I'll be honest, there was a precedent set with a previous censure of a council person who asked questions, aggressively wanted to get some answers about some potential taxpayer money wasted, and wasn't getting answers as quickly or wasn't getting any answers at all. And there was a censure involved with that. In this particular case, we're dealing with a council person who admittedly went to another council person's employment about a journal editorial, a journal opinion. And the journal has nothing to do with his employment, and his employment has nothing to do with the journal. And yet, he decided to go to the employment. I think we all know for what reason. In the investigation, as the president stated, the person was very troubled, I think, by the line of questioning and the line of statements that Mr. Wright was making while he was there, and her comfort with that. So he never ultimately asked them to specifically fire them, but to say something needs to be done about Mr. Sasso, that somebody needs to intervene when it comes to Mr. Sasso. I think we all have a feeling for what that means. It's not about whether Mr. Wright ultimately got Mr. Sasso fired from his job, because that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about the actual end result of his visit. We're talking about the fact that Mr. Wright decided to take action and go to an employer. It could be any one of us on the council. It could be Mr. Roberts going after Amanda, the council president, the new council president coming after my employment, Ron going after a constituent sitting here tonight because maybe they wrote something to him in his email at the city that he didn't like. They attacked him. But that's part of what we do. So it's sad that we are setting which I believe, we're taking less when the precedent was set for something obviously that the public saw wrong, because that person was elevated to the mayor of this city. And here we are tonight now dealing with, in my opinion, something much, much more serious. We're dealing with somebody on the council going after somebody's livelihood, whether that's another council person or a constituent or anybody in this city. It's extremely bad. It's a really bad black eye for the council, and I believe we are making it worse by making this just a reprimand. I don't know if it rises to the height of dismissal, but in my opinion, it is at a minimum a censure, because again, we've already had a precedent for a censure, which was wrongly done, and in this particular case, we had a council person go, in his mind, after somebody's livelihood. And as to what Mr. Weifenbach has said, I have read the same investigation, and there is corroborating comments about Mr. Wright taking credit for it. Ultimately, he did not have the cause and effect of it, but he thought he had something to do with it. And so I believe that those people were not lying when they said that they heard what they heard from Mr. Wright. And here we are going to reprimand somebody for pursuing somebody's employment in a negative manner, trying to cause a consequence which would quiet that person up. I think a reprimand is less than a slap on the wrist, and I won't support that. We need to do something more, because the only way we change the behavior of a future council member or anybody on this council is to deal a consequence that changes behavior. A reprimand does not change anybody's future behavior. It's a slap on the wrist. It's less than that. I yield.
Now we'll go to Darla Drew.
Thank you, Mayor. Is it possible to ask questions of Mr. Wright and his attorney?
I think if they'd be willing to answer them, that would be fine.
I just have a couple of questions. I think they'll be fairly easily answered, but it's just kind of something I need to know. So, Mr. Wright, why did you go to Black Hills Works? What was your intention?
It was not to get him fired. I felt that his guest editorial that was written, was vicious and misleading and incorrect. And let me share with you why. And it's why I reacted the way I did. In that editorial, I'm paraphrasing, accused me of, well, the one shot was being a not physical conservative. I'm not sure what that even means, but the bottom line was that I managed the facility of the landfill when it was corrupt. The reason I took that so personally was I'm 68 years old. I spent 12 years in business and committed my word to people when I bought equipment, bought supplies, hired labor, borrowed money at the bank and so forth, and promised people to do a job and so forth or deliver equipment. Always did. 12 years, I left with some money and all bills were paid and I went on. I spent 27 years in the United States Army Guard and Reserve as an officer. From second lieutenant, retired lieutenant colonel. Called out of retirement in 2006 at the age of 59 to serve in OIF, Operation Iraqi Freedom. I was 59 years old. You don't last as an officer in the United States Army that long if you're a liar or a cheat. Your integrity is everything. An officer that tells a lie is gone. I also spent 23 years with the city, where we did, a number I have in my head, it's about $77 million worth of landfill transactions in 23 years. 3-point-some million dollars in the sale of recyclables. I think close to $1 million in compost sales.
Jerry, I'm going to have to interrupt you
Well,
here.
this is important because I think the people of this community need to understand why I reacted the way I did. Because my integrity and my honor was everything. When someone accused me of being in charge and connotating that I allowed corruption to occur was wrong, and that's why I got so angry. Thank you.
So why didn't you go to Ron? Why didn't you talk to Ron? I mean, you served with him on the council. I mean, that's a question. Why didn't you just go to Ron?
I had talked to him before on other issues, and I just didn't see it as was going to do any good. He'd already made his point. I said earlier, I went, and it was probably not the smartest thing I did.
Okay, that's the end of my questions. Thank you very much. Go ahead and sit back down. I just have a few things to say. I think I'm going to be able to support Brad Estes and his motion. What we do here is pretty difficult work. It's very public work. And what we say in non-council situations, we have to be very careful about what we say. And I know that Mr. Wright knows this. And we can be here and have this nice civil discourse. It's the way that our system works. This is the way that we're going to decide if Jerry did something wrong enough to further go past a reprimand to whether we expel him from the council or whether we give him a censure. I feel that it was really wrong to go to Black Hills Works, and he said that, he knows that. I just don't understand why he felt he had to make that move instead of going and talking to Ron personally. Kind of like Amanda said earlier, if somebody came at me, which happens all the time for us, my initial reaction would be to probably go and talk to them about it before I'd go and talk to their employer. So the people in the room haven't seen this report. They don't know a lot of what we're talking about here when we're referencing the report. But it did make it very clear that I don't think Jerry's remarks led to Ron's release from Black Hills Works. That's all I have to say.
Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to start off by saying that I'm going to support the motion, and some of the reasons are that I feel Jerry's a good friend of mine. We do a lot of social visits. We spend a lot of time together. We are, I think, on the same level of understanding how the city works, how we try to do things, how we try to accomplish things. But as a good friend, I think as a good friend, it is one of my responsibilities to do and to admonish you for your actions. And I believe you've taken that to heart. You've done that. So I appreciate that. One of the other earlier comments that were made here publicly and before had to do with the ability for supporting and defending the Constitution and having that First Amendment right. But also our oath goes a little bit farther and that is that we will faithfully and impartially perform our duties. And that's where I think Mr. Wright failed in that part of the oath, but it doesn't rise to the level of censure. Because as I was reading through the report, there was, and I'm not going to go through each and every detail of where it was stated in there, but the investigators said in his report that a lot of those comments were untrue, that were alleged to be made by Mr. Wright. So those comments made by the investigator sustains what I feel that we are doing the correct version of doing the reprimand. Do I agree with the report that Ron Sasso made in the Rapid City Journal? It's not my voice to say whether it was right or wrong. That is the public's opinion of what that was an opportunity for Mr. Wright to come forward in a different fashion to make that appeal or make a counter argument to that article in the Rapid City Journal. Jerry also admitted that the action that he took was inappropriate. And as a friend to Mr. Wright, you are correct. Those actions were inappropriate. And if I would have had the opportunity to grab you by the ankles and tackle you instead of allowing you to go to the Black Hills Works, I would have done that. Because I believe strongly in what you do and how you do it, except for this occasion. As far as everything else that you're being accused of from the opposition, there's been nothing proven in my mind. It's all speculation. We've heard a lot of testimony about this rising to the level of censorship. And again, a lot of speculation was made by those accusations, and I can't support those being speculation since it was not proven. With that, Jerry, I wish you well. Good luck in your future in retaining your position on the City Council and doing the right thing. And I'm also going to support the idea or the concept within this motion that this report be made publicly so that people can see what the investigator found in his actions and your actions. Thank you. Yield the floor.
I will go to John Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I want to thank President Estes for framing this way that he did. I think that anybody that looked at the investigative report saw a lot of different things in there. I'm glad that we're bringing it to the public. I'm glad the public's going to have the right to read it. I did have some concern that maybe it wouldn't make it out in the public. In my opinion on this and from what I've read, to me it makes no difference whatsoever if Mr. Wright was not the purpose that Ron Sasso got fired. What makes a difference to me is the fact that Jerry Wright even did that. I mean, to me that's just absolutely appalling that somebody in our position would go after somebody else's livelihood. Whether or not that's what he intended to do or not, that's what it looks like he did. And, you know, there's no one on this dais that has not had somebody come after them at one time or another, whether it's during an election, whether it's somebody sending an email, whether it's somebody giving a phone call. That's just the name of the game. And for Jerry to do this, I know Jerry can get upset. I know Jerry can be the greatest guy in the world to work with. I've seen both sides of Jerry Wright. Do I think Jerry's a great guy? Oh yeah, you meet Jerry for the first time on the street and you're going to think he's one of the greatest guys you ever met in your life. But I think he made a very bad decision on what he did, and what worries me the most is he's going to get slapped on the wrist, and we're going to have to vote for it, because if we don't, nothing's going to happen. And I don't think that anybody on this council is going to learn anything by this. What do we learn? As long as you're in a position to have enough support on the council, you can do something and be slapped on the wrist. If this was Steve Lorente sitting out there, I bet the censure would be coming on. Or if this was John Roberts sitting out there, the censure would probably be coming on. Jerry, I like you. You made a terrible decision. Terrible, terrible decision. And I know you'd be the first one yelling up on this dais if it was somebody else that you didn't agree with. So I think it's unfortunate. I'm happy that something is coming out of this, and I'm happy that the investigative report is coming out. I hope everybody will read it, and you can form your own opinion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now, one of the members, Ron Weifenbach, wants to speak again. There's some leftover time that people could yield if you chose to.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. President, and I agree. I think that there's some of us up here that believe that a censure would be appropriate here. I sat through a censure of an alderman at one point, and I can tell you that it got completely lopsided, completely unprofessional, completely out of control. And I mentioned at the onset of my conversation, I was happy that our president stepped up, framed the argument, and we all have a different opinion. The facts are in the report that Mr. Roberts had spoken. I think the level of the reprimand or censure or whatever it may be is going to be arguable. Tonight, we moved, against my better judgment, we moved it to tonight instead of just doing it the other night when it originally came up, hoping that we would have a larger council here. Today we ended up with 7 people. One of the reasons they went to 7 people is when the censure happened with the other alderman, there was 6 out of 9 votes to censure. And they didn't feel that was appropriate. They changed it to 7. Now you can see where it goes the other way. But the most important thing here is that that report that is written by an independent party will get out, and each one of the citizens and each one of the people in the audience tonight will be able to read that report and come to the conclusions that are in that report. Mr. Wright will face an election in a year. The people of Rapid City, the people of his ward, will be able to judge whether they believe that he is fit for this office or not. I see plenty of times that I make mistakes. I see plenty of times my colleagues make some mistakes. I would hope that I would live up to those mistakes, and I hope my colleagues live up to them mistakes. And I know that I'm coming up for election year shortly, and I face the citizens and the constituents. I believe, from my heart, after sitting through that censure and watching the way things transpired, the time frames that transpired, the conversations that transpired, the level of unprofessionalism that transpired, and the level that judging today to the censure then, it would be tough for me to draw those conclusions. I think today we've done a really good job of framing the argument. We've been through it once. We learned from that, and I believe the citizens of Rapid City will look at this, they'll look at the facts, and they'll be the ultimate judges. I think we here will all have different levels of what we do or do not think should happen, but I believe in our hearts that we believe you as the citizens of Rapid City will read those reports, make that judgment call, and as always, you'll make the right decisions. So I wanted to not leave that on the table from sitting through both of them, watching them. I believe that, I don't think any of the information here was fabricated. I don't think any of it was stretched or exaggerated. I think it was pointed. I think the framing of the reprimand, censure, whatever you want to call it, I guess it's a reprimand and censure would lead to a higher level. There's 7 of us, 7 people have to vote. Alderman Roberts alluded to the fact that, I think 7 of us can clearly agree that the minimum cause here would be a reprimand for Mr. Wright. I think and the constituents in his ward will be the ultimate decision maker and the ultimate. And with that being, I wanted to say that because I'd sat through both of them, and I hope that we can understand that and appreciate that. Thank you.
Now we'll go back to Amanda Scott for 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Thank
Thank you, Mayor. I don't think I'll be taking the full minute and 30 seconds. I just wanted to buzz back in because now that everyone up here on the dais has spoken, I know I didn't hear of anyone up here that thinks Jerry Wright did not make a very, very serious mistake. And this meeting started with Mr. Sasso first filing the complaint thinking that Mr. Wright made a mistake, and it started secondly with Mr. Wright standing up and admitting that he made a mistake. The rest of the discussion up here is every single one of us taking great offense to any mistake that any of us make, because it does, again, reflect on each and every single one of us. So this reprimand, even though some council members may think that it is mild, in my opinion, I think it is very serious. I don't know about you, but I, back in school, didn't even want to get called to the principal's office, even if it was a congratulatory thing. It was that everybody knew you were going to the principal's office. So I take a reprimand very, very seriously. I actually believe everybody sitting up here will learn something from Mr. Wright getting a reprimand. And I do agree with Alderman Roberts. It has been my desire from the beginning to make sure that this report goes to the public. When a complaint is filed against an elected official, I believe the public has every right to know what was in that investigative report. So I am in full support of releasing the report and let the public, as everyone up here says, they can form their own opinion. And I believe Alderman Wright has always been available to answer any questions. So thank you, Mayor. I yield the floor.
Okay, we have a four-part motion on the floor. Number one, to reprimand Jerry Wright. Number two, to admonish him from repeating that behavior in the future. Number three, that regarding number one and two, that no further action be taken. And number four, that the report, the investigation report, be released publicly. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say no. Okay, motion passes. A motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor, say aye. Opposed? We are adjourned.